Ladies and gentlemen, the staff indicates we have to begin. And the first thing I want to say is that we are an equal opportunity festival. So I'm just going to remind you that as we discuss the future of the Republican Party today, tomorrow in this room, Jay Kriegel will lead Charles Blow and Mitch Landrieu to discuss the future of the Democratic Party. We're going to begin our task, I put task in quotation marks, with just a brief review of the landscape before we get into my questioning or asking Bret for his thoughts. And I just want to review some of the survey research I guess most of you are familiar with. So the first point I would want to make is that while actual hatred for Donald Trump overall is close to the same level as the hatred for Richard Nixon at the time he resigned in 1974, that nevertheless Republicans are really solidly behind him, as you know. He has close to a 90% approval rating among Republicans, so high it seems fair that to describe the party as not a party organization anymore, but really a cult. And a cult where Republican office holders who aren't slavishly supportive of him do poorly in GOP primaries. Mark Sanford, the South Carolina congressman who lost his bid for renomination in his district there, echoed, those people who say that Trump has stolen the party, and he advised other Republican candidates to just sign on to whatever the president says and endorse whatever he proposes. You know that a large majority of Republicans supported the president's performance in Helsinki at the meeting with Vladimir Putin. That 46% support the family separation policy. These are Republicans. Large majorities support him on trade and approve of his bashing of NATO, the EU, and the G7 allies. 3/4 of Republicans say Trump provides strong moral leadership, and 71% describe his ethics as excellent. And even though 56% of all Americans say Trump has tried to interfere in Bob Mueller's investigation, and an overwhelming majority of Republicans agree with the president's characterization of the inquiry as a witch hunt. This list goes on, and I'm not going to go on and on because I want to speak to Bret. I will make only one other point, which is that, in my view, the president is quite shrewd. He can be careful when he senses that opposition to long-standing GOP positions can get him in trouble. Especially true with gun control. There was a moment there, right, where he was flirting with the notion of supporting more comprehensive background checks and an age limit for gun purchases, but when it was clear that those sentiments weren't going down very well, he reverted to the NRA's long-standing pro-gun positions. So there's a nuance to his madness. And all of this seems to me to raise the overarching question in a politics where the president seems to have no shame and the Republicans in Congress have no spine. Must the nation resign itself to the idea that Trumpism will survive his incumbency, or can something be done about it? Can it be rescued, in a sense? Steve Schmidt says that the only way to save the party, to restore it to a semblance of the party it was when it was invented in 1854 as an organization born in opposition to bigotry, is to burn it down, start from scratch. You agree with that?
Reluctantly, yes.
And how would you do that? How do you burn down an institution?
The tragedy of the Republican Party is, just by virtue of its very size, is that the only way in which it will be discredited in its current incarnation would be by way of a significant national failure. I mean, the Republican Party that I used to consider myself a part of, in all honesty, was discredited by two great failures that happened on its watch. One was the involvement in Iraq, a war I supported, by the way, and then presiding over, and it's true the reasons for its occurrence are complicated, but nonetheless presiding over a financial meltdown in 2008, which a Republican president had done very little to anticipate, along with conservative commentators, people I can think of, people I used to work with, who were cheering the economy all the way up until maybe the Bear Stearns event a few months before Lehman Brothers. So it was on account of that failure that the old Republican Party collapsed and created a space for someone like Trump. You had two failed Republican nominees, McCain and Romney, who tried to present themselves as basically nice and honorable, safe pairs of hands, and they were both badly defeated by President Obama. And so the party reverted to something else, which is always a temptation in conservative politics, which is the temptation of nativism, the temptation of substituting a philosophy of opportunity and aspiration and freedom, at least in some circles of life, certainly not all of them, but at least in economic circles, with kind of a quasi-isolationism, a zero-sum mentality when it comes to foreign policy, rancorous politics on the identity front. That's immigration, that's affirmative action, that's anything that touches on racial and ethnic and national identity. And that politics, just looking at it historically, has a history of being politically successful and nationally—
at times of great stress.
Right, and nationally disastrous. That is to say, you can have a successful party politics, you can take over a party, as Trump has, and you've, I think, outlined just how successful he is as a Republican leader. Just the data shows that he is as successful a Republican president as any, probably since Ronald Reagan, if not before then. And at the same time, put into place a set of policies which can lead to bad places. It's a sad thing to think that the only thing that saves the party from itself is a set of national setbacks or catastrophes that are bound to affect everyone. So it's only when a tariff policy leads to a kind of beggar thy neighbor style economics that we last saw in the 1930s that this will start to hurt Trump politically. But of course, by then it's hurting all the rest of us, whatever your politics may be. It's only when when our ties really start fraying with some of our small and vulnerable allies at the fringes of our security perimeter, whether it's in Asia, in the Baltics, in the Middle East, and so on, that the consequences start to become visible for that kind of mentality. So I don't really know exactly how that comes about, and I'm obviously ambivalent about cheering it on. I just don't see a realistic path by which a party which is so wholly given itself over to Trump's style of politics and to the policy prescriptions recovers a sense of itself.
But if it required Trump, right, to embrace these notions, then why is it outside the realm of possibility that someone else could come along with an alternative, more soothing, so to speak, set of notions and recapture, take away,
I think rescue? Because the secret sauce in Trump's political persona is to be continuously transgressive. And so, I don't know what, it's interesting the extent to which he has borrowed terms that used to be prevalent on the left and turned them to the purposes of the right, the épaté, the bourgeois, that used to be a leftist notion in the 19th century, go after all of the upper middle class pieties which sustain a place, I suspect, like Kent School, right? And keep poking your finger in the eye of these ideas, which, I consider sort of essential decencies of society, but that's successful. The idea that there's no such thing as truth, that used to be the idea of the left, right? You can look at a whole a whole series of figures in academia associated with the left who were calling radically into question the idea that there's such a thing as objective truth, right? And this was all fine when it was Paul de Man or some other ex-Nazi at Yale. It wasn't fine. It was bad for Yale. But all of a sudden, Trump realized that there was a utility in that particular currency. And finally, of course, identitarian politics. What he is saying with a horrendous form, in my view, or a horrible form of white identity politics, he's largely borrowing the language of the left, which is saying, well, if it's okay for the black people to have X percentage and the Asian people to have Y percentage, what about the white people? Now, I don't need to tell, I suspect, this audience what's wrong with that, but that's a very effective form of politics. So to get back to your question, Trump understands, and anyone who wants to be a Trump-style politician understands that they cannot return to a Mitt Romney style of politics, even if you look at some of the policy specifics, they seem like more conventionally Republican policies.
Well, I guess then I want to get back to this question. If you envision, as I think you do, that Trump is a man without ideology, that he will pick up and borrow from wherever anything that seems to work for him. We discussed the other day the Gene Kirkpatrick blaming the San Francisco Democrats, right, and his basically turning that on the head. And
what you're referring to is Gene Kirkpatrick in 1984 gave a famous speech at the Republican National Convention in which she assailed what she called the Blame America First Democrats of Walter Mondale and Mrs. Ferraro. And of course, who blames America first? Almost inevitably, when it comes to Korea, Russia, and so on, it's Trump.
Yeah. So what I'm saying to you is that he is, as has been fairly described, one of the greatest salesmen and hucksters in American political history. He's not new. It's not something we haven't seen before. But if there's no underlying ideology to it, and he can tack this way or that way to conform to whatever he thinks is necessary to keep him in power, then it seems that he would be susceptible to being challenged by someone who adopts the same, or who adopts a true ideological, who is a real true ideologue.
Well, the real ideologue in the last race was Ted Cruz.
Right.
Lion Ted.
Right.
Maybe the wisest thing Trump ever said.
Right.
Look,
let me just.
But let me make a point here, just because I think I disagree with the premise of your question. I do not think it's quite true that Trump has no ideology. I mean, it depends on how you define ideology. He doesn't have an ideology in the sense that Karl Marx had an ideology or Friedrich Hayek had an ideology, but he has at least a set of ideas that have been constants of his politics for a very long time, right? The belief that we are being shafted by our allies goes back at least 30, 35 years. Even I, young as I am, remember the ads that Trump used to take out in the New York Times saying we're being We're being screwed by Japan and Germany, and we're footing the bill for their military expenses.
Right.
The idea of trade as a zero-sum game seems to me very, very fundamental to his worldview. So it's not quite the case that he's not a man of ideas in a very loose sense of the word.
And I'm not saying that he's not ideologically consistent about some things. But he's certainly, let's say, in the social issues that form so much of a core of the Republican angst over the last 30 or so years, he was pro-choice before he was pro-life, right? I mean, there are many examples like that suggest he's just picking and choosing whatever he seems to think works. That's what I was trying to get at. But I want to move to something else. So you watch this very closely, obviously. I have in the past. If you could wave a wand and return the party, rescue the party from Trumpism, what kind of a party would it be? Would it be a party now derided as the establishment party, the party of Dewey, Eisenhower, and Rockefeller that was hawkish on foreign policy, conservative on fiscal policy, libertarian almost on social policy, or would it be something else, or what?
Look, there are 2 points, there are 2 sides to that answer, which is what my personal preference would be, and what realistically you can imagine.
I think we're interested in both.
Well, look, I mean, I'm a guy who's pro-choice not to 40 weeks, but to 40 years.
Right.
I think we should. There are all kinds of people hit 39, we say you're a mistake.
All right. I agree with that.
I hope I'm being taken seriously, but not literally.
Right.
I have, as long as I can remember, thought that the animus among conservatives on sexual issues, especially LGBT issues, is perverse and insane and mean-spirited. So some of the old kind of conservative pieties never sat well with me. I don't think you could actually form a successful conservative movement that simply tried to divorce itself from the pro-life movement just as a political reality. And I've always felt that people who are sincerely pro-life hold their views with conviction and with reason. I don't share those reasons. So the party would have to have, for starters, the party would have to believe in the things it believed in, or I thought it believed in, all the way up until 2015. It has to believe in a foundational concept of truth. It has to believe that there's no such thing, or cultural relativism is a lie. There is an idea that's called the West. The West, at the heart of the idea of the West, is what V.S. Naipaul, the great late V.S. Naipaul, called praised the pursuit of happiness, that immense human idea, as he put it, that encompasses all men. That a Republican Party that stands for aspiration, for opportunity, for making it, for celebrating success, for offering people second chances, but also insisting on a sense of moral and individual responsibility. These are a set of ideas that I can imagine refounding a Republican Party on. A Republican Party that doesn't forget that foreign policy is not a zero-sum game, and that we benefit from being an anchor at the heart of a free world that extends from Riga to Seoul, to Canberra, to Jerusalem, and so on, and that we are well served by defending that world, not imprudently, not foolishly, but defending it and reassuring that world against a series of ideological and military competitors and aggressors who mean that world ill. So that would be something of the party. I don't know, I wouldn't call it an Eisenhower party, because I've always thought but look, it's also one more thing. It's a party that understands that the most beautiful color is not red, it's purple. It might be a little more red, there might be a little more red than blue in that shade of purple, but the governors and the politicians I admire are the ones who have consistently been able to win over the votes of wavering Democrats, moderate liberals, whether it's Governor Hogan in Maryland, Governor Baker in Massachusetts, Governor Kasich in Ohio, Senator Ben Sasse in Nebraska. The people who give the lie to the old accusation that Republicans are the stupid party. That would be something of the party I could imagine.
Okay, but then how do you get from here to there?
Well, you pray.
Or as Steve would, as Steve Schmidt would say, you light a fire. But I
Look,
mean,
one point I'll make to that, and this has come to me with some difficulty because it's so much fun as a columnist. Your best sentences are the ones that are pouring gall on your opponents, right? Just from the standpoint of sheer the pleasure of writing. And I mean, the first column I ever wrote on Donald Trump in August of 2015, the first sentence said something like, if by now you don't find Donald Trump appalling, you're appalling. Now, as a sentence,
it's perfect.
It's great.
Right.
It was a stupid sentence to write, and I regret it. Lincoln, in his speech on temperance in the 1840s, has a beautiful line in which he says, "A drop of honey draws more flies than a gallon of gall." Right. And the whole approach of those of us who call ourselves never Trumpers, although I don't know what that phrase really means, or certainly, you know, many of my colleagues on MSNBC, it's all gall. It's all, you're a racist. Your brother supports Trump, he's a racist. You know, your sister-in-law, you should have nothing to do with her because she's a racist, and so forth and so on. And just as a question of tactics, it's terrible politics. And it's also, in some deeper sense, untrue. And that's why I regret that first sentence. Because look, if you look at the objective state of the country, we had 4.1% growth, 3.9, basically we're at full employment. There's a limit to which some of my colleagues at the Times can keep on saying, well, it's just Obama's economy. We're, you know, getting into almost 2 years of a Trump economy, and these were the same people who were telling us the world economy would never recover from Trump's victory. A lot of the deregulation, I think the lowering the corporate tax rate has clearly done something, at least for now, to improve the lives of lots of people that we rarely see. These are people we know sort of in our mind are the Trump voters, but we don't think. You know, when growth goes down to 1% for me, it doesn't touch me. It doesn't touch my salary, doesn't touch my life. But when it goes down for 1% for someone maybe living up here or further north, it does.
Okay, so you're back to Clinton's, it's the economy, stupid.
It's a lot of it, sure.
Right. But then you could posit some kind of economic downturn that would cause people to move away from Trump, yes? And I don't know in which sectors you think that might be possible, but what might they be? How about healthcare?
Look, when there's an economic downturn, it's not always a matter of just one sector.
Right.
The economy is a, you know.
But where might it be felt first, do you think? Despite the numbers, right?
Well, as we used to say in Israel, I mean, it's depend.
Right.
Look, here's my problem, which is to say, let's hope for a recession is marvelous if you really want to recenter or refine the Republican Party of yore and diminish Trump's popularity. But the reality is that also hurts millions of Americans who are much less privileged than I am. So I'm loath to cheer that.
No, I'm not
That's
asking
why
you to
I
cheer.
say prayer as my answer, not entirely flippantly.
Which is a wonderfully competent political thing to say. We applaud it. We will all pray.
Yeah.
Then let's turn to the other issue. A lot of people, right, are hoping that the Democrats take back the House.
Yes.
You're one of the people who believes that would be really good for Trump.
Oh, it'd be marvelous.
So explain that.
Well, because Democrats are going to do what they do, which is behaved stupidly. Look, if Democrats take the House and they, first of all, let's say Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker once again, that's like a gift from God for Donald Trump, okay? You can't imagine, I mean, Trump must actually feel religious impulses at the thought of her becoming Speaker again, right? The Pelosi Democrats, the San Francisco Democrats, that perfect mixture of pretending you're with the people when everything about your life is not with the people, okay? These are the pompous liberals that the Trump base despises and wants to punch holes in again and again, and they did it with great success with Hillary and her jaunts to Martha's Vineyard, and they would do it again with Mrs. Pelosi. And all that's leaving aside, yes, she's successful legislatively, she knows how to run a caucus, et cetera, et cetera. Politically, she's great to run against. Secondly, the Democrats will start impeachment proceedings. Now, I'm old enough to remember the last time a president was impeached, and he left office with a 63% approval rating. Right. Okay, if you're going to strike the king, you better kill him. That's a cliche, but it's true in politics as much as it is in whatever medieval lore or literature. So they'll go after Trump, and unless they have really clear black letter evidence that Trump conspired with the Russian government to steal the election.
That's the point. It depends on what the articles were.
But it's not going to be that. It's going to be a matter of interpretation.
Stormy Daniels and
right?
stuff
It'll be Omarosa said she heard the tape, and I mean this kind of stuff. I mean, just every time I listen, I hear the word Omarosa. This was the subject of my column today. Mm-hmm. I don't understand what are opponents of Trump thinking by turning Omarosa into a figure of credibility? I'm putting it out there. I've been on 4 MSNBC shows successively, Nicole, Stephanie, 2 others, and it's Omarosa. I'm like, Afghanistan, Turkish lira crisis, wildfires in California, whatever, Lyme disease epidemic, Omarosa. This is how Trump wins.
Okay. Let's just talk a little bit about what you might consider to be truly scary. You've written, other people have said that Trump's lust for wins, however described, however defined, leads him to summits like Singapore and Helsinki. Just concentrate on North Korea for a second. It is possible, is it not, that what we're seeing now in the response of Kim continuing his missile programs could really rub Trump so wrong that he could become unhinged in that sense and actually go to war?
I would be surprised. I don't think that's Trump's style. A guy who can't bring himself to fire a person to his face is unlikely to want to start an unnecessary...
No, but I think the argument is that he doesn't have to go up with a gun and shoot Kim in the face. He just says
when
Mattis, push the button.
Yeah, well, when the Korean missile hits Mar-a-Lago, that will really be concentrate Trump's mind.
Be a slap.
I don't see Trump as that kind of figure, and I don't see. Look. One of the mistakes I think Trump's critics have made, and your question, I think, is of a piece of that mistake, if I may say, is the idea that Trump's presidency is about catastrophe. I'm not sure that's right. I think Trump's presidency is about corrosion. It's about the corrosion of trust in our institutions. It's about the corrosion.
That's the ultimate catastrophe, I would say.
Well, right, but it's a slow moving one. It's one that you only notice sort of over time when you're just astonished.
18 months isn't long enough?
By what's happened. But my point is it's not being punctured. When Trump was elected, it was the stock market was going to crash, the sky was going to fall, one thing after another. These things
have not
happened. And when they don't happen, his critics sound like so many chicken littles, right? What really, I think, the root of my objection to Trump is the corrosion of those things, those civic values and concepts, and the whole notion of social trust that undergirds successful societies and civilizations.
Okay, so let me come at it from a slightly different point of view. You've said, in my judgment correctly, that that George W. Bush profited greatly after the Clinton scandals by promising to, I think his words were, restore honor and dignity to the White House.
Yeah.
And keeping in mind that and your charge, which seems completely true, that Trump is morally unfit to have this office, you've nevertheless said that charge, that kind of bashing in the face, a Pelosi-type charge, has been made so often, right, that it's lost most of its edge among the swing voters who would have to cause him to lose at least an election. Do you really believe that? Do you think there's it goes on so long, people just turn away from it?
I mean, I was thinking about this just yesterday in terms of the question of whether there is a tape out there in which Trump uses the N-word, right? Would it move a vote?
No, I mean, if the Access Hollywood tape didn't move a vote, why would this?
So that's my point. So, look, the thing is, in life, if you tell one whopping lie, it will haunt you to your grave, right? Clinton told lots of lies, but one of the whopper was, I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky, with that finger jabbing. And we'll always remember, anyone who was alive then will remember that, and that will be front and center with his New York Times obituary, I hope, many years into the future. If you tell 1,000 lies a day, you can't remember one, right? Because outrage becomes a victim of its own ubiquity. It's the famous line attributed to Stalin, the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic. So Trump has created a culture in which there is so much noise, to borrow an old term, that there's no signal. It's just static. A friend of mine who's a successful businessman made a point, which I think is important for those of us who are critics of Trump to take cognizance of. He said, look, when I look at the situation with the volume on, it's terrible. I can't stand the sight of Trump's voice. I can't stand all the noise he generates. When I press the mute button, everything seems okay, right?
Right.
And that's, I suspect, a view that some people in this room share as well. They sort of look at their stock portfolios, they look at the overall scheme of the economy, they say, it's doing all right. And so you can't attack Trump by simply saying, can you believe the latest outrage?
Well, first of all, the people in this room, just by virtue of their being here, and this is a serious point, are not among that cohort. They take it seriously, they care a lot. It matters to them every day, day in and day out. They're not what you would call the problem. The problem is somewhere else.
Can I just test that? How many people here know the name Gonzalo Curiel? Okay, so about half or so, maybe a third. Gonzalo Curiel is a federal judge who was presiding over the Trump U trial, and born in Indiana, happens to be of Mexican descent, and Trump attacked him in 2016 in the most scurrilous way by suggesting that as a Mexican or a person of Mexican heritage, he couldn't be trusted to preside fairly over the trial. I think it was one of the lowest moments in the campaign, and yet 2/3 of you don't remember his name. I'm not blaming you. I'm simply saying who can keep track.
Don't fudge the math. You said half the people.
Well, half. Okay.
I mean, no, I understand. What?
Yeah.
What? What's she saying?
Well, she's saying she remembers the case, but not the name.
Oh, okay. Anyway. No, I understand what you're saying. But I also want to just go back to lying Ted Cruz for a second.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. The critique of Trump before he won, right, was that he was this flim-flam man, right? He would adopt any argument that advanced his position, while someone like Cruz was pure. If Cruz looked like Bill Clinton, if he had some easy manner instead of this hard-edged nastiness that was about him, might it have made a difference? You know what I'm saying? There's something about, in this day and age, just the optics of a candidate that cause him to do better.
Yeah, I think the word that applies to Senator Cruz is oleaginous.
Yes. Exactly. And we all know what that is. He was a judge who may, in the other case, no. I'm not searching for a particular candidate. I wanted.
What I think you're saying is if you'd gotten a good ideologue, right, could he have beaten Trump?
Yeah. I guess it is what I'm saying.
That's a great question, and I suspect not. Because Trump is a phenomenon that you sort of come across historically as a kind of a cult of personality figure who seems to transcend ideology. And as I said, what was so weirdly appealing about Trump was the delight he took in the transgression, in not backing down, in not ever apologizing in the face of liberal derision and demands that he bow to some verity or other. And that's a very powerful form of politics. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is that, in a way, it took, at least in a certain sense, the stupidest guy ever to be president to raise the deepest philosophical questions the country has had to face about the nature of political leadership in a democratic republic. I mean, people have made the point, Madison and the founders created checks and balances precisely for a guy like Trump. And now we're seeing whether they work or not, or whether they will erode over time. I would only add one thing, which is, I call Trump stupid. The guy is not exactly stupid. He's stupid in the way that if I was chatting with my son on the way up here, quizzing him on state capitals, knows them all, and I wondered how many state capitals Trump would know, and I would be amazed if he got 6, right? But Trump is cunning, and Trump has a form of intelligence, or whatever you want to call it. What was the phrase that wonderful in Scoop, someone describes journalists as having a low rat-like type of cunning?
Yeah. That's him.
That's kind of him. I mean,
okay.
But that's important.
Okay, we're gonna, I obviously am no match for this guy. So we're gonna open up to questions. Could you bring the microphones down, please? But as we do, I do want to say seriously, to reinforce what I just said about being no match for Bret, that I think you understand that what I said this morning, or earlier this afternoon at the aperitif section, about this guy being the smartest, most articulate writer about politics today is true. Okay. So go ahead. I didn't mean it, by the way.
Yeah. Can we discuss the future of the Republican Party without mentioning Fox or Rush Limbaugh or the boys? Before Trump, the majority of Fox viewers thought the stock market went down under Obama, that private employment went down under Obama, that he was maybe a Christian, maybe not, maybe born in the U.S., a majority. What happens even if Trump goes away, if Fox and the others stay?
It's a wonderful question. First of all, let me thank Michael for distinguished moderation and excessive modesty.
Stop this. Go ahead.
And it's an honor to share the stage with you. One of the things that I think happened, I don't know whether it was Warren Buffett or some other guy like him, talked about the 3 stages of investors. First come the innovators, then come the imitators, and then you have the idiots. Right. And something like that applies to conservative intellectual life as well, which is that in the late 50s, early 60s, you had this kind of efflorescence of really interesting right-of-center political thinkers who defined a movement, set borders, excommunicated all kinds of bigots and conspiracy theorists and so on. And they were, and I know some people object to these names, but they were like people like Buckley and Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz. So, you can name different people, but they had interesting things to say. And they were providing intellectually astute and sometimes absolutely profound critiques of the liberal welfare state as it was evolving in the 60s and 70s. Then you had the imitators, and I'm kind of like one of them. You might say Bill Kristol is, whatever. But basically, we came of age, and one of the things that was important for us, this goes to your question, was in order to make it as a, quote, conservative intellectual, you had to make it as a writer. You had to prove that you could write an 8,000-word essay in commentary, right? And have Neil Kozodoy edit you like with a poleaxe, and survive the experience. And so you had to have kind of a whole world of reference. You had to be sort of a serious person. What Fox did is it meant that you could have a new generation of talking heads, quote, intellectuals, who were just morons, right? And I mean, I'm sorry I'm going to say this. Sean Hannity is a moron. To be on his show, I was on his show a few times, and he would just say something, and you would think, wait, I think he just asked a question, right? Because he couldn't think of the question, so he was hoping you'd bail him out, and then you threw the stupid football. And then the moron decided he was a man of ideas, right? And this is sort of the story of what Fox did to the conservative movement. So Limbaugh, Hannity, Bill O'Reilly looks like an intellectual titan next to these guys, right? All of these people were both vehicles for an utterly debased and continuously self-debasing form of conservatism. And they had this mega platform that people who were running the little magazines, the weekly standards of the world could never have dreamed of. And initially, those of us who came from that commentary, weekly standard, journal editorial page world thought, oh, this is a great amplifier. But it turned out they didn't want us, right? Making...
Well, they couldn't even understand you.
God forbid you made a reference to Evelyn Woe. I mean, forget it. They didn't care, and they were receptive to, they were essentially both vehicles for demagoguery and receptive to the message of demagoguery. So it's very hard, and this goes to, I think, what is a very astute question, simply because of the technologies that we have to disseminate mass opinion, it's very hard to imagine a Republican Party recentering itself around a set of intellectually defensible, decent, and coherent ideas being championed by serious people.
As long as Fox is still broadcasting.
And that's going to be a very long time.
Okay, so then let me just pick up on that, because I've been interested in this. Rupert Murdoch has a history of turning on and killing his kids, right? He did it in Australia. Well, not literally. He turned on Tony Blair.
Well, there were reasons for that.
There were always reasons. There were always reasons.
Which we will not go into.
No, that's true.
Small thing.
Yeah, that's a little, never mind. But you know what I'm saying. I mean, if for some reason that particular megaphone decided it was going to change its ideological focus, that would have a big effect, would it not?
Yes, of course it would, although it would simply mean that if Rupert Murdoch had some come to Jesus moments, like, I've unleashed a Frankenstein here.
Right.
Well, then the formula would simply be picked up by Sinclair Media
Okay, so
or
you see.
someone else.
All right.
So I don't see that happening. Once you've decided that Iron Maiden is the greatest band of all time,
Right.
it's very hard to go back to Johann Sebastian, right?
Right. That's true. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So, Bret, did it shock you or surprise you that the party the party so fairly quickly consolidated under Trump? And what would you predict? What would you predict our future with this movement toward authoritarianism? How's it going to turn out in your view? And I think those two questions are very much related.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I mean, my predictions are terrible politically. I was so certain Trump could never capture the nomination and would never win the presidency and would surely antagonize so many members of the party that they would have to break away. So all of that is wrong, which forces me, just out of intellectual honesty, to kind of go back and think, who was I keeping company with this whole time? Mm-hmm. So that's one side of it. Historically, I think we're in a period very much like the 1920s and 1930s. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? It's Eliot published The Wasteland when Mussolini marched on Italy. When I think of elections taking place, by the way, this is both a left and a right-wing phenomenon. So a populist bigot just became, or is about to become, Prime Minister of Pakistan. Mm-hmm. Populist bigots just took over the government in Italy. Mm-hmm. A populist bigot just came in second place in the presidential election in France. In Germany, where I lived for the last year, the AfD, a bunch of populist bigots, are the third largest party in the Bundestag. Poland, Hungary. In Mexico, we just had an election with a Trumpian-style figure, AMLO, being elected president. Right. Hates the media, thinks they're lying. He likes to use the term the lying media. So this kind of impatience with parliamentary democracy, with all the procedures, the checks and balances, the deliberate slowness of a well-functioning liberal democratic system, this fascination with strong men, this anger with what used to be the verities of the time, all of that seems consonant with what was happening in Europe in the 1920s and then again in the 1930s. So that's the analogy. And I hate to say this, but my wife and I are addicted to this Netflix series, Berlin, Babylon, or is it Babylon, Berlin, which takes place in Berlin in 1929, and it captures the spirit of the politics of the time on the eve, of course, of Hitler's electoral success, and the parallels are dismaying. That doesn't mean the past is prologue, right? But it does mean, Twain, it rhymes, and we should be mindful of it.
Susan,
yes,
very quickly, because we only have a minute.
Some of it I was going to ask about that, but Michael, when you stated those numbers in the beginning, in a way that's a little false because the total number is still so small. What is his total grasp? 33%, 39%. So I don't know that those numbers.
Well, the 40% is the normal number that we kick around, right?
And what about the rest of us?
Pardon?
And what about the rest of us?
What do you say?
I think it's very difficult to know because the point you're making is actually a very substantive one, which is to say he might have captured 90% of the Republican Party, but how many people have just fallen away from the Republican Party? And hopefully, at least from my perspective, many people have. So what appears to be rock-solid grip on the party is in fact an illusion.
Well, we won't know
then
until
again,
it's tested.
It might be the opposite of that. We just don't know. And one of the things that I think almost deliciously we were reminded of in 2016 is how much little wisdom can be derived simply by looking at data. The best moment in a good political book on on the Clinton campaign and how it fell apart is this moment where Bill Clinton, being the political animal he is, stumbles into the campaign. And he says, God, I'm kind of going around and I see all these Trump signs, because he's just got that sense of politics. And some nerd in the Clinton campaign says something like, the data disprove your anecdote,
What do you do with that? Okay, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I especially want to thank Bret for this incredibly optimistic view of where we're headed from here. And I wish we had a few more hours, so don't be too depressed. Thank you.